Resident Evil is one of the most popular video game franchises in recent history. Basically, it's the Super Mario Brothers of the survival horror genre. Really, just about every single Resident Evil game has garnered critical praise and has gone on to sell at least 1 million copies.
I'm just not that big a fan of Resident Evil games, except for 3, 4, and 5, and that's mainly because in those games, you can, well, save, and you have more than 2 bullets, and you can actually find more than 1 Band-Aid box.
Not having a PS1, my first exposure to the Resident Evil series came in the guise of Resident Evil 2 for the N64. I rented it all of one time, and hated it all of one time. Basically, I didn't know where I was supposed to go, I didn't know what to do when I got there, and of course, to top it all off, I couldn't see anything! I mean, really, this has to be the worst camera system of all time. It's just disorienting beyond belief! Also, you can't save unless you have ink ribbons. You know, that idiotic method of saving was supposed to somehow increase tension, but in all reality, all it does is increase aggravation.
As for the very first Resident Evil, I hated it. As for its remake, I hated it even more. Now please keep in mind, this is only my opinion, so please, no flames!
Now really, I'm just not that big a fan of survival horror games in general. For me, I just want a gun and a googly-eyed alien to shoot it at. I don't want to have to run away, and I don't want to have to try and avoid enemies. I just want to shoot something. Now, this may seem somewhat contradictory, but I am a fan of the overall Resident Evil mythos. And that's because I read the novelization to Resident Evil 1 long before I ever played a single Resident Evil game. So for me, my overall hatred of the earlier Resident Evil games has something to do with disappointment. Because for me, I was not expecting that type of gameplay at all. With gameplay aside, let's take a closer look at Resident Evil, the Umbrella Conspiracy. So the first problem is, what does Resident Evil even mean? Are the residents of the Spencer Mansion supposed to be evil? Because when you think about it, the only resident that is well and truly evil, meaning they had malice aforethought, is Wesker, and he doesn't actually live there. The monsters and the zombies are not evil because they are only following biological imperatives. Now in Japan, the game and the series was called Biohazard, which is far more apt, because really the entire scenario was indeed a biohazardous situation. The cover itself, it's fairly decent, even though it lies when it says it's terrifying. The book really is just a pulpy action story. The best thing, though, is it is a labeled book, meaning you can't confuse this one with any of the other ones in the series. As for the various illustrations, they look decent enough and serve as a good way to conceptualize the different enemies, although the humans on the bottom look like action figures. But overall, it does help you figure out what the different things and people are supposed to look like, and at the very least, it is vastly superior to the original Resident Evil cover art. I mean, look at this! Does this convey what Resident Evil is supposed to be about? From this cover, it looks like the game is supposed to be some sort of Evil Dead knockoff. So with that, let's enter the survival horror that is Resident Evil. The novel opens up appropriately enough by introducing our main characters. This is something that the original game did not do a very good job of. Really, we just saw their names and what they looked like. We didn't really know anything about them. We learned that they're all fairly comfortable with one another, and they have a fairly decent esprit de corps. One thing that this book does that the game really didn't do all that well was it shows the different events from different character perspectives.
Unlike in the game, all of the characters present in the mansion actually take an active role. The different character pairs of Jill and Burton and Chris and Rebecca split the different mission objectives and boss fights between themselves. And yes, at the very end, all of the characters actually escape. Rebecca doesn't get left out this time.
The characters' backstories have been expanded a bit. Jill is now the daughter of a former thief, and she has a personal motivator in the raccoon killings, as 2 children she befriended were killed by zombies prior to her main mission. Redfield is said to be a fairly proficient marksman. In addition to that, he is supposed to be an able pilot due to some experience with the Air Force. Prior to the mission, he voices concerns that Umbrella may not be what it appears. And, as should be expected, nobody believes him. And Burton is pretty much like he is in the game. Annoying. And yes, Jill Sandwich does appear in this novel.
That's an example of a time when the book follows the game just a little too closely.
Perry does a pretty good job not spoiling the fact that Wesker is a traitor, even when the story is told from his perspective. When he is actually found out to be a traitor, his overall villain persona is fairly basic, and he has a few twirly mustache moments. In addition to all of that, the inventory screen/map is actually given an explanation.
The one thing that makes the novels make a little more sense in the games is the fact that there's a character that works on the inside of Umbrella that helps our different main characters at different points in the series. His name is Trent, and he's fairly highly placed in Umbrella. And it'll turn out later in the series that he's actually the son of one of the founding members of the Umbrella Corporation.
The first character he helps out is Jill. He gives her some type of plot device computer that has the ability to display maps and other things of that nature. Basically, it's one of those computers that can do everything. So after Jill receives her MacGuffin, our heroes begin the long fight out into the world of survival horror. The initial insertion goes about as well as can be expected. The resident redshirt Frost gets eaten by several Cerberus, and Vickers takes off in a panic.
My question is this: why did Vickers take off and leave his team to die? In all reality, it would have made a lot more sense for him to just have taken off and hovered a bit until the landing zone was cleared. It would have been completely in keeping with his cowardly nature, but in this case, him just stranding his entire team is not just cowardly, it's stupid!
Now in the game, Chris or Jill, depending on which character you picked, just disappeared for some reason. I guess he accidentally triggered his or her continuity changer. Here, though, the entire Alpha team actually arrives in the mansion together. Now, when they get inside, they actually hear some sort of random noise, and Chris is sent out to investigate. When he does, he gets separated from the rest of the team and encounters a zombie.
Don't say that.
What?
That.
What?
That. The Z word. Don't say it.
Why not?
Because it's ridiculous.
As it would turn out, the zombie that Chris shoots is actually the source of the blood that Jill and Barry find.
Surprisingly, he takes it pretty well. Although he does mention something about late-night horror films. Really, I think there have been plenty of mainstream zombie films that he didn't really need to reach that far.
Well, after Chris's disappearance, Wesker, the fearless leader that he is, sends Jill and Burton in after him, only to find the same zombie that Chris ran into. Yeah, some expert marksman he was. How can you not make a headshot at under 6 feet? Also, here in the game, why is it that Barry just doesn't back off or aim better? He's at bayonet range. How do you keep missing? Well, after that zombie is dispatched, our overall plot begins. And what ensues is a massive key hunt. All throughout the novel, our main characters are hunting for keys. Initially, our protagonists are just looking for a way out of the mansion so they can go get backup. Wesker is trying to destroy Umbrella documents so that they are not implicated in the loss of containment. Like I said earlier, there are a few story differences from the game, like the different boss battles and mission objectives being split between Jill and Chris. For example, Plant 42 is killed by Chris and Rebecca rather than just by Jill. In addition, the Neptune is also killed by Chris, but Jill still kicks her own share of ass as well. However, one of the big problems is Burton's betrayal leaves something to be desired. At no time is he convincing. In the book, there are just so many tells described that I don't know how Jill could have missed it.
Jill's denseness aside, the one thing this novel does well is that it does not drag. Whenever you have a story cooped up in one location for the entire book, it can get boring. But here, the plot moves along at a fairly decent pace, and it never does get tiresome.